Hello, welcome to the LRB. I'm Steve Miller, and with me here is Anthony Gadd, a legislative analyst. Hello, Anthony.
Hi, Steve.
Anthony has just written a Wisconsin brief on rethinking the moratorium on nuclear energy. Anthony, tell us a little bit about nuclear energy in Wisconsin.
Currently, nuclear energy accounts for about 20% of the energy produced in Wisconsin. And we have 3 nuclear energy units in Wisconsin. There are 2 at Point Beach and 1 at Kewaunee. These nuclear power plants have been around since the early 1970s, and they've been running on 40-year licenses. In fact, Point Beach actually just received a renewal of 20 years in December of 2005, and Kewaunee is expected to apply for another renewal in 2008.
I remember that the 3 Mile Island accident occurred in the 70s. How did that affect the use of nuclear energy in Wisconsin?
The 2 nuclear power plants that we have right now are both from the 70s. And in fact, in looking at the entire country, no new nuclear power plant was ordered after 1979. Because in 1979, a nuclear core meltdown happened at 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania. And this had a backlash effect for the nuclear power industry. Not only did you see protests, but you saw legislation being introduced in the states to try and control construction of new nuclear power plants.
In Wisconsin too?
In Wisconsin as well. In 1979 and 1981, there were legislation introduced for temporary moratoriums on nuclear power plant construction that required the Public Service Commission to study the economics of nuclear power and to report to the legislature. Neither of these bills actually passed, but in 1983, a bill did pass that enacted a conditional moratorium on nuclear power plant construction.
And what are those conditions?
The 2 conditions are that a new nuclear power plant must be economically advantageous to ratepayers compared to feasible alternatives. And there also needs to be a federal waste repository that's got a large enough capacity to handle all of the nuclear waste in Wisconsin.
Okay, so that moratorium is preventing adding capacity in Wisconsin, is that correct?
Yes, basically. If the moratorium conditions are met, then the Public Service Commission can authorize the construction of a new plant.
Well, let's talk about those 2 conditions and how close are we to meeting either of them?
Well, if you look at the being economically advantageous to ratepayers, currently the operating costs of nuclear power plants are low compared to coal, natural gas, but the capital cost, the cost to actually build a new plant, is much higher. So when you look at the overall net effects, nuclear power is actually more expensive in the short term, and it gets less expensive over time. When you look at the requirement to have a centralized federal waste repository, that has been slated for Yucca Mountain in Nevada, but that's been held up. Currently there are controversies, there are accusations of falsified data, and there are different reasons to believe that that's being held back, and that may take a while to be constructed, if ever.
Several years, I would assume.
It's hard to say now, but definitely the deadline has been pushed back more than once, I believe. And you look at nuclear waste in Wisconsin, and for example, the waste at Kewaunee is expected to exceed capacity by 2013, and nuclear waste is still sitting in La Crosse, I think about 333 spent fuel assemblies from a plant that shut down in 1987. So nuclear waste is not going away. It's piling up in Wisconsin right now.
Okay, so the moratorium may be in effect for a long while. What are the alternatives to nuclear fuel if we're looking at new technology?
If we're looking at new technologies, there are things like coal gasification plants that will use coal in a way to try and produce energy with virtually no air pollution. And same thing with hydrogen fuel cells. But those technologies are still a while.
Well, are there other issues that relate to the use of nuclear power?
Absolutely. While the moratorium is based on economic issues, there are issues such as environmental, safety, security issues. For example, even though nuclear power generates virtually no air pollution, there's still the issue of nuclear waste, which is dangerous for about 250,000 years. There's also some estimates of pollution happening at the uranium mines. So nuclear power is not without its pollution. Also, there's the safety security issues. There are issues like terrorism. There are issues like accidents. For example, if Yucca Mountain is developed, we will have nuclear waste being transported via rail or trucks through relatively major population centers, and that possibility of accident exists. Also, although the risk of another 3 Mile Island happening has been reduced with new technologies and new safeguards, the risk of an accident still exists at the plants themselves. In fact, I think it was only in December of 2005 where a plant had to be shut down in Wisconsin due to a mechanical problem. And both Kewaunee and Point Beach have had plant shutdowns in the last couple of years.
What are the alternatives to using nuclear energy in Wisconsin?
Well, there are some promising technologies out there, such as clean coal or coal gasification plants that would produce very little air pollution. Also, there's hydrogen fuel cells. There are all sorts of different renewable energies. One renewable energy that seems to be more promising in Wisconsin is wind power. In fact, 2005 Act 141, which was just passed by the legislature, creates a goal of 10% of the electricity sold in Wisconsin coming from renewable energy sources. And it appears that utility companies are gearing toward wind power as that source of energy.
What's the date of that goal?
The goal is to reach that 10% level by 2015.
So what's the basis for all this talk about nuclear power in Wisconsin now?
Well, in Wisconsin, the demand for electricity is going up. And with renewable energies still being in their early stages of the development, it's most likely that we will rely on fossil fuels. The biggest source of energy we have right now is coal. Coal accounts for about 70% of the electricity produced in Wisconsin. But the problem with coal is that it's dirty and it creates a lot of air pollution. In fact, the Environmental Protection Agency estimates that about 26,000 deaths per year are correlated to the air pollution from coal plants. And also, coal plants create much more global warming than nuclear energy or other sources.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you for watching the podcast. If you'd like to know more, you should read Anthony's brief, which is available on the LRB website.
Thank you, Steve.